at all. And I think if I speak for about 20 to 30 minutes, is that okay? And then more than happy to open the floor to questions. I'm more than happy if people would like to stop me during the presentation and ask a specific question about some aspects that I mentioned. So more than happy to be interrupted, or if you just want to listen to the whole sort of input and then ask questions afterwards, more than happy with that too. Just mindful, I've dialed in on a browser, so I can't actually see it. I can see you, Joe, but I can't see anybody else. So I might not be able to see hands up and things like that. So you might have to direct me. Let's see if I can put it on gallery view so I can see people.
Well, the questions are going to be on the chat, so I'll just ask you them if that's useful, if that's best for you.
That sounds perfect. I can see people now. I've got you up on gallery view. So yeah, by all means, if you want to facilitate, that's great. So I thought I would start the session today. A quick introduction, explain who I am and my background, talk a little bit about what policing used to be like in order for you to get the context of the future of policing. Because describing the future of policing without knowing what policing used to look like is probably difficult to then place in the context of what it might look like going forwards. So I'm Lisa Winward. I'm the Chief of North Yorkshire Police, which is an absolute privilege. And I've been the Chief Constable for about 3 years now. I had no desire to be a police officer whatsoever when I was growing up and when I was at university. So I came to policing as a result of volunteering as a special constable. So I'd completed my degree at the University of York in psychology. I went and worked in a job in retail and joined the Special Constabulary as a volunteer, still not quite sure what I wanted to do as a career. And in doing so, found what I would call my calling in life, really connected with policing and helping people. And that really was the light bulb moment for me of deciding that's what I wanted to do as a career for the rest of my life. So I joined policing in 1994. I joined Humberside Police as a regular police officer. So policing has changed more, I would suggest, in the past 5 years than it's probably changed since the history of policing. So when I joined the service 27 years ago, the description I would give is still a very traditional policing style. There were no mobile telephones, if you can imagine that situation. There weren't many computers. Excuse me a moment. So people couldn't contact us in the way that they contact us now. Excuse me, I've just got a frog in my throat. So traditionally, people would stop and speak to us on the street. They would pick the phone up and phone our control room from their phone in their living room or their hallway. They didn't have any mobile ability to contact us. So the sorts of crimes or incidents we would deal with 20 odd years ago were vehicle crime, burglary, traditional sorts of crime types, generally in-person crime, where somebody would physically have to be at the scene of an incident to commit a crime. So there was a lot of contact in relation to that crime. And policing used very traditional investigative methods. So if you can imagine a situation where you would attend an incident and you might have some eyewitnesses as people who'd seen something on the street, you might arrest somebody and take them into custody and interview them on tape recorded interview machines. So no DVDs or technical solutions to that. It was standard cassette tapes. And the evidence that you would have would be very limited in terms of basic forensic science, hardly any technical solutions such as CCTV or anybody recording anything. So there was a limited amount of evidence to pull a file together and put to a court. And that file was done handwritten. There were no computers, so you would handwrite everything. It would physically be then taken to the court with the prisoner, a very traditional style of delivering a service. So just setting that scene, I will now move on to, so what does the future of policing look like? So in the past 10 years, I would suggest, there's been massive increases in everybody's now got a mobile phone, everybody's got a computer, everybody can put something on social media or the World Wide Web in a second of it happening and it be transmitted around the world. People can get hold of us much more easily. Crime has changed immensely from a very face-to-face, hands-on experience of criminal behaviour to online. It's less risky. You don't need to physically go anywhere to commit it. It's much more anonymous. It can be global. So there can be somebody sitting at a computer in a country thousands of miles from here, committing a fraud in this country on your computer, and there is no way of us tracking back to that person's computer because they've used a system of going through several other computers in order to commit that crime. So it's very, very different to the hands-on, low cards principle of forensic sciences. Every contact leaves a trace, and that's true. But when it's physical contact, it absolutely leaves a physical trace in comparison to a technical trace that is much more complex and much more difficult to then detect or investigate. So policing has changed as a result of the world changing. So one great example is designing out crime. It's nothing that the police have done. So a great example of that is vehicle theft. So traditionally, 27 years ago, we had a lot of vehicle theft. So people would get into a motor vehicle, they would use their technical skills using the wires under the steering wheel, they would break the steering wheel cabinet off from underneath, and they would use the electric system to start the car without the keys by putting two wires together. Today, it's very difficult to steal a modern car. They're very technical. You can't just pull the cowling off and put two wires together. It won't work. They're much more difficult to get into. So you would argue what a great thing inventing more technology in vehicles to stop them being stolen. But what that has created is a different type of crime. What that has created is the criminals thinking, I want to steal a car. I can't do it in a traditional way. So we've seen an increase in burglary because people now break into people's houses to steal the car keys in order to steal the car. So technology has prevented vehicle theft in one way, but it has created a different type of crime and a different type of criminal who will now break into your house to take your keys instead of trying to steal the car in a traditional way. So policing has changed to try and keep up with that style of criminality that sometimes has been caused by great advances in technology. They've been benefits to society, but have actually created a different crime type as a result of that technology being invented. In exactly the same way, we saw a lot of vehicle crime in terms of people driving into petrol stations where they would fill the car up and drive off. It's called a make off without payment. So we used to deal with a lot of that in traditional policing. You don't see that so much anymore because all the petrol stations have got CCTV, so they can take images of people, and therefore those people would be detected and identified. Potentially their car registration numbers are detected because they're being filmed. But what again that has led to is a change in the way in which those sorts of crimes might be committed. So you might see now you can't go in a petrol station and fill up without prepaying on the pump, or you've got to physically go into the shop and you can't fill up without doing that. And people therefore may use cloned credit cards, for example, in order to commit a similar sort of crime, but in a completely different way. So I would argue that crime has moved into a more technical era, and therefore policing needs to move into that technical era in order to keep up with and to investigate, detect and prevent those sorts of crimes. So the types of people who join policing therefore need to change, and the skills that they need to do their job. You still need traditional skills to police. Speaking to people, it's still a very people-orientated service. You still need to have skills to write statements, to gather evidence, to speak to people, to reduce conflict out in the nighttime economy. But you also need much more technical skills in order of delivering that service. So now attending an incident similar to the one I described earlier, where you would go to a job and there would just be witness evidence and somebody to arrest in a tape recorded interview, almost every single incident that we deal with now in policing involves some form of technology. So seizing people's telephones, computers, having those telephones and computers examined is extremely complicated. As you will know yourselves, devices are locked and we can't just get into them, and some people won't give us permission to get into them. So we now need kit equipment and court orders to get into people's phones and computers when we don't know the passwords to those items. So the sort of technical equipment we need to own as a police service has also massively changed in order for us to effectively gather the evidence that we need in investigating a crime. And therefore, people joining policing need to have some of those skills available to them, that they understand the technology, they understand how to use it. And that's quite complicated because technology is changing all of the time. So you might join a service and have the technical skills. So there's much more of a challenge now for policing of how do we keep those technical skills up to date in those staff and officers that join our service. So I would argue that the skills required to deliver a policing service have changed massively. If we think back to the history of policing, so policing was invented, if you like, as a job, a career in 1829 by Sir Robert Peel. People volunteered to deliver policing services. Before that, there's always been volunteering policing, but being paid to be a police service has only existed since 1829. And that's changed hugely because those individuals joining that service were on duty all of the time. They were paid the equivalent of about £1 a week. They weren't allowed to take any annual leave. They had to wear their uniform all of the time. They had to ask permission about who they could mix with, who they could marry, where they could live. And some of those things still exist in our regulations in policing in terms of permission of where you can live and certain things. But of course, the style of policing has changed massively since those days. And people don't live where they work. We're not on duty all of the time. You don't have to wear your uniform all of the time. And people are much more liberty to live and have a private life within the society in which they live than they did originally when policing first started. So there are still massive restrictions on police officers' lives and what they can and can't do in their private lives, which have been carried through from that period. So the future of policing, in terms of the types of people who might join the service, has also changed. So lots of people, young people, probably don't want those sorts of restrictions on their lifestyles because it isn't just a job. You have to live your life in relation to the ethics, values and codes of conduct by which policing operates. And as you will see from social media and other aspects of life out there, that people's views and opinions are much more open. As a police officer, you can't express those views as a police officer. So there may be people who feel constrained by being in a policing role in a way that they might want to deliver a service as a police officer, but they don't want those other restrictions on their lives that come with undertaking that role as a career. So I think the future of policing might look very different in terms of the sorts of people who are willing to forego some of those aspects of their life or privacy or the way they want to live their life in order to undertake that role and live with those regulated restrictions that are placed on officers. The other way policing has changed and will continue to change into the future, and I will draw sort of to a close and give you a chance to ask questions after this part, is that we are much more balanced now between officers and staff. So policing used to just be predominantly police officers, and they used to undertake all sorts of roles, including office related roles, answering the phones in the control room, looking after lost children, front office duties, all sorts of roles that police officers, warranted police officers undertook. That has changed over the time and will continue to change. So we now have a very mixed economy workforce. So in that workforce, we have many more police staff now who have very specific skills in what they do. So a lot of our technical skill people, the people I talked about earlier that examine phones and computers, are police staff. They're not police officers. They have better skills than officers to do that. They're technically trained. All of our control room operators are police staff. There are a couple of roles in the control room that are police officers that are required because of legislation, but the vast majority of the people serving the community in the control room are now police staff and not police officers. We have police community support officers. So they are police staff. They fulfill a really important role in terms of community engagement and being the neighbourhood policing, the bedrock of neighbourhood policing in our communities. They're also police staff and not police officers. So we've got a much more mixed economy workforce. And I think going forward, although we've got a 20,000 uplift of police officers that the government are supporting for the next 3 years, we will still see that mixed economy of service of staff who've got the skills that are needed by the service working side by side with warranted police officers. And we need that mixed workforce in order to deliver our service effectively. So just those aspects of looking forward to the future of policing, I think crime has changed massively and is much more technical and global. I think the type of people who join policing will change going forward and has changed in terms of the skills and style of policing that we now deliver. And I think that we'll also see a service that is much more balanced in terms of the skills of staff and officers working alongside each other going forward in the future that are required to make sure that we can keep our communities safe and feeling safe and deliver an effective and efficient policing service to our communities. So I'll pause there and be really interested to hear your questions.
Thank you so much. That was really, really fascinating. And yeah, thank you everyone for kind of coming. Frank has got the first question, but before that, I've noticed a few people have come in, so I'll just repeat. If you do have a question from that excellent talk that Lisa's just given, please just write it in the chat. Either I've got a question or type it out, or if you don't want me to publicly. If you don't want to publicly put out, then please just message me privately and I will ask the question on your behalf as well. So I'll take it away, Frank, with the first question.
Thank you very much, Joe, and thank you very much, Lisa, for your talk. I just wanted to ask, you talked about sort of the restrictions placed upon police officers. I assume that's to do with social media. Is it sort of like how broad are these restrictions that you're talking about?
No, that's a very good question, Frank. So thank you for that question. So if we go back to the history of policing, as policing has developed, police regulations were formed. So the police regulations still exist. They can be looked up. They're there on the internet if you want to read about them. But regulations very much talk about the restrictions on what police are. And I'm not talking about police staff here, police officers. So the terms and conditions under which police officers operate. So if you're a police staff member, you're a normal contracted member of staff like any other person working in any other organisation. Police officers are servants of the Crown. So they don't actually have a contract of employment as such. You are there to uphold the Queen's peace, protect life, protect property, and you don't have a contract of employment as such. You are a public servant and a servant of the Crown. So some of the restrictions that are placed on servants of the Crown are that we are warranted police officers on and off duty. So once you've sworn an oath to be a police officer, you cannot remove yourself from the fact that you are a police officer. Now, you can be off duty and you have to carry your warrant card around everywhere with you. And if you witness something in public life, you can be out on a social night out. And if you witness something that should be tackled and dealt with, you have a duty of care and responsibility for the public, even off duty. And you should go and intervene in what's going on to prevent somebody's life being at risk or harm to property or somebody coming to harm. And you basically would go with your warrant card and book yourself back on duty and explain to the public, even though you're not in your uniform and you're not looking like you're at work, you have a duty to act. So there are certain restrictions on your private life in terms of what's expected of you. And if you failed to act and somebody was harmed, seriously harmed, you could be called to task in terms of dealt with from a discipline perspective for neglect of duty for failing to act in those circumstances when you have a duty of care. So there's lots of restrictions privately, even though you're off duty, on your requirement to act in those circumstances. So we have a code of conduct of ethics and values, and you have to live by those ethics and values in your whole life, not just when you're on duty as a police officer. The values and ethics reflect on you even in your private life. So if a police officer ends up getting themselves into trouble off duty in their private life and they do something wrong, they can lose their job even though the event happened in their private life. So the regulations have changed slightly over time. You'll imagine that from the history of not being able to book off duty and getting into trouble in Pelian times in 1829, things have slightly changed. But when I joined the service, you had to live in the force area. You had to get permission to live at your home address. So you used to get visited at your home address by another officer before you joined to see if you lived somewhere suitable. You had to ask permission to get married. So you had to declare the details of the person that you wanted to get married to from a vetting perspective, of that being a suitable person for you to still be a police officer. So lots of restrictions on your private life in terms of what you can and can't do. It's not just a job. It's actually a vocation and a lifestyle in which you have to live the values under which you serve as a police officer in your private life as well as in your work life.
Thank you very much.
If I can work with Zoom, that would help. So I think the next question comes from Beth King, I think. So, yeah.
So my dad was in the police force. He worked in West Midlands Police for pretty much all of his life. All my growing up, I've known him as a police officer. He's retired about 8 years ago now, and he has very, very mixed opinions about the people currently joining the police force and whether he thinks that this is a good thing that this new type of people is joining the police force. Do you think that the new people joining the police force is causing it to change for the worse or for the better?
That's an excellent question, Beth. So, Pelian, back to Sir Robert Peel. Sir Robert Peel said, "The police are the public and the public are the police." And I think society has changed. Therefore, if you want the public to be the police and the police to be the public, we have to reflect the communities we serve. So society has changed. You would argue for us to effectively deliver a service to society, we have to reflect the people in society to understand the people that we are serving. So from a diversity, equality, difference within the service, we absolutely welcome difference joining the service, because how can we understand the communities we serve unless we reflect the community as they currently are? So it depends whether we feel as though, linked to your question, the wrong sorts of people in society are joining policing, or is it just that the current way society has changed, those people are now joining policing, but they're actually reflective of society. And I think that is the fundamental difference between whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I think if it's just society has fundamentally changed in its nature, and that mix of society is now joining policing, I think it's a good thing, because we can deliver a better service to the community, because we are reflective of that community and understand their needs, and people can understand what's going on in society from within the organisation, and we will deliver a better service because of that. I think if we think policing is recruiting people of the wrong nature from that societal pool, then that's a bad thing, because you need to be able to have trust and confidence in your police service. So legitimacy is really, really important. So if you don't think the people who are serving you as a police officer are legitimate, they're not the right people who carry the right values, the right ethics, they don't do the job in a way that you feel delivers the best possible service to the public, you won't trust us as a service. And if you don't trust the police service, who can you trust? That's a very bad place to be. If if you feel you can't turn to the police when you need to. And if you don't trust us because you can't turn to us, you won't ring us when you witness something. You won't provide evidence when you might be a good witness to something that's happened. You won't report crime to us if you don't think that we'll investigate it effectively. And our lifeblood in policing is intelligence and information. So without accurate intelligence and information about what's happening in society in terms of crime, people getting hurt, things we need to know about are going on, we can't deliver an effective service to prevent that harm or prevent crime if we don't have a thorough and accurate picture of what's happening in society. And if people don't think we're legitimate and they don't trust us, they won't provide that information to us. So the cycle would go around. If we have the wrong people that give the wrong impression and don't instill trust and confidence in the public, we can't deliver an effective service. So it really matters that the right people are joining policing, that instill trust and confidence, but it will depend whether you think the wrong people are joining or just a balance of the current society.
Thank you very much. So the next question is, do you think territorial police forces will be replaced with national police, a national police force in the future? So like a Police Scotland merger was the example that was given.
That's a very interesting question as well. So I think nationally here in England and Wales, so Scotland have got Police Scotland. They've gone down that route. I think that England and Wales is too big for us to do that as one national police force. I do think, though, the journey that we're on with some services might be national, some might be regional, and some might remain local. So local policing is really important. And I think that element of local knowledge, connection with the local neighbourhood policing service to your community probably can't be delivered on a national scale, because you're still physically, from a geographical perspective, got to have people in your locality to deliver that service. So there'll always be physically located services in your local vicinity, delivered by your local policing organisation. We already have regional assets. So we have a regional organised crime unit. We have regional units that deliver services for the whole region. We already do that in certain areas. And we also have national services. So we've already got some elements. So we've got a national air service. So our helicopter and air service is delivered as a national entity, because for each and every one of the 43 forces of England and Wales to have their individual own helicopter unit just wouldn't be affordable. It wouldn't be efficient. It wouldn't be an efficient use of resource. So we do share some resources nationally and regionally already, but I personally don't think we would move away from certain elements of policing being delivered locally. There's also an aspect of the funding of policing. So local policing, North Yorkshire Police, is paid for partly by government grant centrally and partly by local taxes. So
the police are a fascist organisation that are taking away our democratic right to protest. This government.
Sorry about
Shall I
that.
carry on, Joe?
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know who that was. We were kind of wondering whether we would kick them anyway, but I'm not sure what happened there.
They're entitled to their views.
As long as they express properly, and I'm not sure that was really
free speech.
Exactly, but as long as they, not quite like that, I think. So sorry, I'm so sorry about that. That hasn't happened before.
So yes, there's an element of the local population pay for local. They pay for their local police service. So when there's been discussions before about merging larger policing areas, the local community will have a view about the fact their council tax is paying for local policing. And North Yorkshire's a very safe place. So North Yorkshire's low crime, big geographical area, but we have one of the lowest crime rates in the country. So if we merged with a regional, imagine if we had a regional police force and funding was regional, resources would get drawn to where the highest levels of crime and demand are. So you might end up paying for a policing service in North Yorkshire and not actually receiving the proportion of that policing service that you've paid for, because we have a lower crime rate than somewhere else that we're sharing those resources with. So I think there'll always be an element of local policing paid for through local council tax, but it makes sense for us to have regional and national assets that make more sense to deliver on a larger scale.
Right, thank you very much. Yeah, sorry for the interruption there. I'm not. Yeah, that's not happened ever before, so slightly taken back by that. But yeah, I'm very sorry. So the next question is that Britain is currently facing a mental health epidemic. Do you think that police officers today are equipped to deal with the mental health crises that are going on in society?
So mental health and concern for safety and public safety and welfare type events are much more common now. When we talked earlier about policing of the future, so we've become much more broad as a service in the types of incidents that we deal with. So only around 20 to 30% of our calls for service are crime. The rest of the calls for service into our police control room are about public safety and welfare. So concern for safety, threats of suicide, mental health episodes, people going missing, people in crisis. So we deal with a lot more people in crisis than we ever used to. And people pick the phone up to us and we deal with that sort of incident much more now than we ever have. And you'll have seen through the period of COVID that some of the reports from mental health agencies and from the clinical commissioning group have indicated that they think we are, I think the figure that's been thrown out there is they think we're going to see a five-fold increase in mental health crisis as a result of COVID and the year that we've just had. So we already have a lot of crisis. So if we're going to have 5 times more than we have seen recently, that's a lot of mental health incidents. So policing has tried to adapt to that change in demand, and we now train all of our officers and staff who are on the front line in dealing with mental health crisis, so they are trained to a higher level to deal with those sorts of incidents. We work really closely with the health service, so we have mental health triage in our control room, and we have a street triage out with us on the streets on patrol. So when somebody calls us in mental health crisis, we've got trained mental health nurses in our control room who can speak to them, can divert them into the correct services to help them. We as police will, of course, always turn out to somebody where there's a threat to life. As I said, one of our primary roles is to preserve life. So if we get a call for crisis, we'll go and prevent that person from harming themselves. But we will then work really closely with health service and mental health services to support that person into the right treatment system to get that person the help that they need. So we do give additional training because of the increase in mental health crisis, but we're not the experts, we're not the primary agency to deal with that, and we need to work closely in partnership to make sure that people get the help that they need.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really interesting. So the next question is about plainclothes police officers protecting women in and outside of clubs. Do you think that that's going to actually make a difference, or will that just catch the perpetrator rather than stop the crime?
So again, these are all very interesting questions. So out there in society, there are 2 ways of looking at this issue, and violence against women and girls is obviously very, very topical at the moment in terms of what's going on in our environment. There are 2 ways of looking at this situation. You can try and make people less vulnerable. So when people go out in the nighttime economy and they have a drink, they have fun, they get separated from their friends, they might be vulnerable. So there are things we can do to advise people about how they can be less vulnerable as an individual. But you would argue that person shouldn't have to worry about being vulnerable, because it's the perpetrator that needs to be, or the people who are putting that person at risk, that should be challenged, and not the person who is the vulnerable person or the exploited person. So there are ways to prevent yourself being more vulnerable. But the real argument, the really important aspect of this is, how do we tackle those who are looking to exploit vulnerable people in the nighttime economy, or exploit people that are maybe have had too much to drink and can't look after themselves as well as they would be able to. So having a system, as you've heard about, of funding where you can put plainclothes officers covertly out in the nighttime economy. They spot people's behaviour. So they might spot somebody who looks like they've got an unhealthy interest in women, or somebody out there in the community who might look like they're not with their friends, might be vulnerable, might be exploited. And it's spotting those people and preventing them, and using intelligence as well about those people in society who are out there looking at people that would be unnatural, not normal, they're acting or behaving in a strange way, is a really good way of preventing somebody from coming to harm. It also is a way of capturing that person before they do something, and trying to get to the bottom of why they want to exploit vulnerable people in the nighttime economy. And again, this is about getting to the root causes of why their behavior is the way that it is, and trying to get help for that person if their behavior is linked to something where we can actually change their behavioral attitude towards vulnerable people in the nighttime economy. So there's very similar schemes to this in terms of domestic violence. So there are domestic violence programs running now where it used to very much focus on protecting the injured party, the victim, and now there are programs that are much more effective at dealing with perpetrators. So actually doing behavioral change in the perpetrator to deal with the root cause of the violence, because you can't protect every vulnerable person. We'd like to, but the only way we will stop bad things happening are if we tackle the behavior of the people who are the perpetrators. So plainclothes officers in that environment can support tackling people behaving in a strange way in society and stopping them from harming somebody in the first place.
Thank you very much. So the next question is, do you think that the police being a patriarchal institution that needs dramatic reform, and if it doesn't reform, then it can't protect women from situations like that of Sarah Everard?
Again, very interesting question. So I think policing's changed hugely. So the gender split in policing now is very different than it was. We massively welcome diversity into policing now, in terms, and we spoke about this a little bit earlier, in terms of in North Yorkshire particularly, so 50% of our senior ranks, so 50% of the people who are chief inspector to chief constable, which is basically senior management levels in North Yorkshire, are female. That's not the case across all police forces, but it's becoming more and more of a regular feature that there are more women in policing, a better balance of diversity across policing, but not everywhere. So we are already, I would suggest, in progress in terms of that reform. So I probably disagree with the sentiment that we can't protect people like Sarah Everard as a result of the makeup of the police force. There are bad apples, inverted commas, in all walks of society, and that includes policing. We talked earlier about reflecting the communities that we serve, and therefore there will always be people in big organisations like policing who do not hold the values and ethics of that policing organisation. And I would put a caveat on this in terms of innocent till proven guilty. So I'm not commenting on that specific case, but there will be people who are police officers that commit crimes and do bad things because people in society do bad things. And we may find people join policing and they are one of those people that do bad things. And we will absolutely deal with those individuals who do not follow the values and ethics and are fit to be serving in a role where they're there to protect others. So I do think policing deeply cares about protecting women in our communities and protecting all people in our communities. And I think our workforce is now becoming more balanced from the workforce perhaps of the past, where it was a very male dominated and very different feel as an organisation.
Okay, so the next question is about, do you think that there can be, how can the police deal with the issue of the blue wall of silence, where officers cover up wrongdoings at times?
Okay, so we do deal with it in terms of the values and ethics that we've just talked about, where there is a conversation going on as we speak about duty of candour and about having those honest conversations with people when things have gone wrong and having those conversations quickly. There's a fine balance between something going wrong and us absolutely having to make sure that it's been investigated and reviewed before we influence or impact on that impartial investigation and actually speaking out about something. So I agree with you, blue wall of silence, absolutely unacceptable. When something's gone wrong, we should be honest about it. If people are not willing to be honest and want to cover things up, they should be tackled for covering those things up. We don't want to be that sort of organisation. We want to be transparent, but there will be occasions when bad things happen and we may be unwilling to comment at that moment in time, because it could create a situation where there won't be an impartial and transparent investigation or inquiry or review. Speaking out could damage the impartiality of that review or that investigation, and could actually damage it for the person that's making the complaint. So it's exactly the same with court cases. So everybody is entitled to a fair trial. And that's why sometimes the impartiality of trials are damaged by people speaking out before a trial happens and putting their view of the world into society, and then a person can't have a fair trial. It's a similar situation. I believe in a duty of candour. We should be honest when things have gone wrong, but there will still be certain circumstances where it's right that a review takes place before somebody makes a comment or jumps to a conclusion about what took place. And there's always complexities in different versions of events that sometimes in circumstances need to be examined independently before comment is made.
Yeah, thank you so much for dealing with these questions. There's lots of them are very challenging, and it's always good to have a challenge with these things. But the next one, it's a really interesting question. It's we've seen gun use, particularly by the American police, a lot more in the news. How do you think the role/use of weapons in Britain is changing or will change?
Okay, so I don't ever see a time when we will be an armed service completely. So in America, it's very different. For those that have read in and around some of my career history, I attended the FBI in 2011 and did a leadership course there. They all carry arms. All of the police officers there carry sidearms. Many more people get shot in America. In some cases, police officers predominantly get shot by their own weapons, by people taking them off them and shooting them with them. I don't think we're in that environment in the United Kingdom. I don't ever see us being a fully armed police service, because the communities we serve, we police by consent. We deliver a community style policing service here. And yes, we have firearms officers because we do deal with incidents where a firearm is required in order to protect the community from somebody that might pose that level of danger that needs to be dealt with through firearms response. So weapons, we've always seen quite a lot of knife crime. There are arguments in certain parts of the country, like the Metropolitan Police area. You will have seen some media publicity about the increase in knife crime and people being stabbed, and particularly between young people and gangs, etc. So some of that is linked probably to Beth's question earlier about society and people in society feeling the need to protect themselves. I think we're on a path to try and reduce the amount of weapons that are out there in our communities, and try and reduce the amount of gang crime, which is often linked with weapons. County lines drug dealing is also linked very closely with weapons. So we're trying very much, I think, to reduce the amount of harm that's caused in society by weapons by educating people about the severe harm that they can cause, the danger of carrying them. Even if you're carrying them as a defensive mechanism, the likelihood of you then being more seriously harmed as a result of carrying it in your defense, rather than you thinking, well, I'm going to be able to protect myself. More people get harmed in that way than actually it being a defensive or a helpful tactic for them to carry a weapon. So I think a lot of it is linked to education and trying to educate the community that this is not the way forward, and not the way for our society to develop. We don't have a lot of gun crime in this country in comparison with other countries, for example, in the USA. And again, the National Crime Agency do a huge amount of work at tackling gun crime and the transfer and purchase of guns in this country. So there's a lot of work that goes on in the background to actually reduce the amount of weapons. And I don't think we've ever seen a serious increase in serious weapons in this country in comparison with other countries.
Thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. The next question states that the reputation of the police force has nosedived. Sorry, lost the ability to speak for a second. Not only in the UK, but also globally. The main reason being that the police are seen as tools of the state rather than a force to protect citizens. How do you propose the force as a whole should combat this increasing viewpoint, especially after the events at the Sarah Everard vigil?
Okay, well, I can't comment on the Sarah Everard vigil specifically, and there will be an independent review of that particular situation at the weekend, which I think is welcomed by everybody, that there will be a proper review of the circumstances, and the full circumstances can then be examined in a way that's fair to everybody. That's obviously, there's lots of varied views about what happened. So in terms of policing, I think you'll find that the vast majority of people, including myself, joined policing to be a public servant. We're apolitical. I'm not affiliated to a political party. We're not allowed to be. I'm allowed to be privately, but as a police officer, our job is to be public servants. So our roles are distinctly different from those roles where people are in government, those people who are tasked with passing legislation. Our role is to keep the Queen's peace, protect life and property, help people. We're there as a public service, and that should always be independent of any sort of control from a political perspective. Yes, there will be political persuasions in terms of legislation that's passed. You've seen it this weekend. There have been people in London with placards talking about the new police and crime bill and the things that are in it. That will run its course. It's a piece of legislation. And we may be consulted on pieces of legislation that are being designed, but ultimately, as a service, a law is passed. That is a process over here. I am here to uphold the law. They are the laws of the land. They've been through a recognised process. There is a democratic process in this country, and our job is to be public servants and to keep people safe. So that's my role. There are different views, and I respect the view of the person that asked the question. I think you'll find that the vast majority of people in policing do their role because they genuinely want to help people and keep them safe and uphold the law and make sure that people in society can have a good quality of life.
Forget to unmute myself. After like over a year of using Zoom, I think I'll be able to use it by now, but still I'm that technologically inept. Okay, so the next question is about, would it be possible and helpful to establish some kind of more tightly surveyed local and perhaps global standard for police forces to reduce general brutality, corruption, abuse of power and public distrust?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah,
please.
okay. Would it be possible and helpful to establish some kind of more tightly surveyed local and perhaps global standard for police forces to reduce general brutality, corruption, abuse of power, and public trust?
So I think I may have misinterpreted the question. There already are really clear standards on behaviour in policing linked to corruption, how we do our job. So in that respect, it's there already is a very clear standard that we have to operate under in terms of our standards of professional behaviour, ethics, Nolan principles, values, etc. And we are measured by them and we are disciplined by them. So there is a recognised standard in the police regulations. And if you step outside of those standards, then a discipline process is invoked and you would be either criminally charged for your behaviour if it's corruption, or you would be disciplined. And there are discipline processes where you would find yourself, if you are a corrupt police officer and you're investigated, you would find yourself as a result of that at a gross misconduct hearing. And the sanction at gross misconduct could be for you to be sacked and lose your job. Obviously, if you ended up at a criminal trial, it's the same criminal outcomes as any other member of the public. And you will also go on a barred list. So if you are sacked from policing, you go on what's called a barred list and you can't work in policing ever again, because your name is put on a register that you've lost your job from a police service as a result of your behaviour or your actions, and therefore you can't go and do another policing job as a result of that. We're vetted. So we have very high vetting standards that are national standards in terms of your background, your finances, your family, your history, things you've done before. So I may have misunderstood the question, but there are already clear standards in terms of the behaviour of police officers in respect of things like corruption and bad behaviour.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sorry, I wasn't quite sure of the question myself, and I thought maybe I don't know, I'm not an expert on policing, so I thought, oh, maybe it's something that's gone above my head. But this next question I don't understand, so that's good. So it's do you think that there should be national procurement of uniform/vehicles, etc., rather than each force having their own unique uniform/vehicles?
Okay. So we do already have a national procurement process for vehicles and uniform. So we have a company called Blue Light Commercial that exists in order to do national level procurement for policing contracts so that we're more efficient and effective. So at the very least, we do regional procurement and some national procurement, and we're on a national framework for things like our fleet purchases. So we do have national and regional frameworks already for procurement.
Thank you very much. I'm really sorry if I haven't asked you questions. Some of these questions I'm just slightly avoiding because I know they can't be answered. So I'm really sorry if...
No problem.
Or just to the audience more generally, if you've asked a question and it hasn't been asked, it might be that I've slightly missed it, and I'm really sorry if that's the case. Or otherwise, there might be, I can't really ask them because I know they won't be answered, and it'll be a bit of a damp squib. So the next question will be many of us, will be voting in the Police and Crime Commissioner elections in May. What do they actually do, and how can we judge their effectiveness, and who's accountable for what when much of the policing is under the responsibility of police officers, not politicians?
Okay, so that's a really interesting question. Please do turn out and vote. That's all I can say, because of course, from an apolitical perspective, I can't give advice on any particular voting trends for people in terms of police and crime commissioners. But the role, I will just stick with the technical aspects of it. There is something called the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act 2011. And the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act sets out the clarity of roles between a police and crime commissioner and a chief constable. So there's a policing protocol that sets really clear lines in the sand about whose role is what. So the primary role of a police and crime commissioner, they are a democratically elected individual who is responsible for being the voice of the public, the advocate of the public in holding their local policing services to account on behalf of the public. The Police and Crime Commissioner is held to account by the Police and Crime Panel. The original design of Police and Crime Commissioners is that they would be independent. So even though they might be affiliated to a political party, their role is independent of politics. And they are the voice and advocate of the public independently to hold policing to account for delivery of services to the local community. So their role is to set the police and crime plan, the strategic direction of the force or the service that they are the Police and Crime Commissioner of. They have a role of recruiting a chief constable. They are responsible for the finances of the organisation, so they hold the funds and then they allocate or transfer those funds to the chief in order to run services. And their job is to hold the chief constable to account for delivery of those services against that budget and make sure that that chief constable delivers the most efficient, effective and legitimate police service against that budget that's value for money that keeps the community safe and feeling safe. Now, here in North Yorkshire, we have a police, fire and crime commissioner. So the police, fire and crime commissioner is also in charge of the fire service in North Yorkshire, but there are only 4 police, fire and crime commissioners in the country. All the others are just police and crime commissioners. But you'll have seen from the Police and Crime Commissioner review, phase 1, that's just come out literally hot off the press, that there is going to be more mandation for police, fire and crime commissioners in areas where they are coterminous with their police forces and they are currently governed by a fire authority. So that will develop as it goes forward. There's a really clear role for police and crime commissioners in terms of their oversight and holding to account of policing. The protocol then sets out a chief constable has operational independence in terms of delivering a service to the community, and the police and crime commissioner can't usurp that operational independence.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting. This next question hopefully will provoke a really good answer, but it's an interesting one. What actions can the police take if it's in conflict with the Crown?
Who do you mean by the Crown?
None of these have been my questions, just to put that out there. So like, but I presume it means I presume it means the monarchy, but I'm not 100% sure. Whoever wrote that, please, if you could clarify that, what you meant by the Crown.
Yeah, just clarify what you mean by being in conflict with the Crown.
Yeah, and I'll move on to the next one because this is less ambiguous. Or at least I hope so. Is with Brexit and the UK losing access to Europol, what do you think the future of international police cooperation will be?
Okay, so for months and months and months, I could probably say years, processes were being developed and put in place to take account of the removal of some of the European arrangements that were in place as a result of Brexit. So there are alternative ways of working internationally in the same way. They're different processes, but those processes still exist, just not in the same way that they did when we were part of the European Union. So alternatives have been put in place through legislation that we can use that means we can still deal with cross-border international crime investigation and arrests and arrest warrants and all those things that existed. So there are just alternatives in place that are different to the European arrangements.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. Now, I think this is if this is probably going to be the last question. I'm really sorry if I've missed yours out, anyone out there, and I'm really sorry there's some that I missed because they include lots of personal information, and this is going on social media and places like that. So I'm not sure this is the best place to put out these, and there's probably other forums or other places that you can ask this with rather than right here in a kind of a meeting of students. So I'm really sorry if I've missed those questions. This is not like a personal slide or anything like that. It's just, I'm not sure that's the best place. But this person is concerned about the representation and is often seen as general rather than local concern, and more specifically, diversity stats and forces seem to be in relation to national statistics rather than the statistics of the communities they actually serve. North Yorkshire Police reportedly has 12 Asian officers and just 3 black officers. We know percentage-wise that this isn't representative of the population. So is this representative of North Yorkshire?
Okay, you're absolutely right. We're not representative of the communities we serve here in North Yorkshire. And we're just about to have a census, aren't we? I hope you've all filled it in because it's illegal not to. So the census is out there. And the last census showed that in North Yorkshire and the City of York as a collective, we have a BAME population, so Black, Asian, minority ethnic population of 3.4% in North Yorkshire and the City of York. North Yorkshire Police currently has 2.7% representation from that group. So we're not there yet, and we know we're not. So they're the current figures. We are currently recruiting to about our latest intake, if you like. So this year's worth of intakes of officers have seen a 7.7% BAME representation in that cohort. Now, when you divide that by the wider workforce, it still won't get us to 3.4%. because it's diluted by the fact there's already 1,500 officers in the force. So even though we're over recruiting against the census population, we're still going to have to continue to recruit well above the census population in order to reach something that is representative of the communities that we serve. We take it very seriously in North Yorkshire. We have positive action teams. We've got a dedicated team of people that go out and liaise and work with our underrepresented communities to try and provide that link with policing so that we can attract people from underrepresented communities to come and join us in policing, because it is really important that we have that diversity within our workforce so that we can deliver the best possible service to our communities, because we're representative of the community. The census that's taking place at the moment, we think that's going to be higher than 3.4%. So even though our current aim is the 3.4% and beyond it, we know that we're going to have to get beyond that, because I think the census that's taking place as we speak will show that that's increased. So we know policing nationally is not there, and we know policing in North Yorkshire isn't, and we would just encourage people from diverse backgrounds to come and take a look at policing as a career.
Thank you very much. This is the final call for questions. If there's any other burning questions that you have, please type them in the chat, or just please just type them in the chat. And just while you're typing, if you are, I just want to thank Lisa for coming tonight and giving a really great talk and answering all the questions really well. Many of them were really challenging. Thank you all who asked questions. That was lots of engagement, and thank you ever so much, Lisa, for coming. And can I also thank Baroness, obviously she's not here, but she helped facilitate, she facilitated this talk. Can I thank Baroness Harris as well? She might be watching the recordings or something, I don't know. She's a very busy lady, so I doubt it, but she's extremely lovely, and thank you ever so much. It was really, really good. So thank you very much. Thank you.
So thank you to all of you for your engagement, and I hope that your university life gets back to normal very soon. I feel so much for all of you that have been studying through COVID, because it's not the normal university experience, is it, that perhaps you would all have. So thank you very much for your engagement this evening, and if you're considering a career in policing, then don't be a stranger. We'd love to hear from you, and thank you for all your really interesting questions tonight. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you ever so much, and thanks also to people here from PolSoc as well, because it's not just Politics Society running the event, but there are some people here because they're from PolSoc as well. So thank you ever so much, and I don't see any more questions out there, so thank you ever so much, and hopefully see you all in future events. I think there's another event coming up on the 24th of March about India, so hopefully I'll see you, lots of you there. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Wait, hang on.